My family told everyone I was a burden. I sat quietly at my nephew's graduation dinner, then his professor walked over to our table, looked at me and said, "Excuse me, are you Dr. CLARA HART?" The entire table went silent. Even my sister couldn't look me in the eye. Don't forget to comment below what you think will happen next. Subscribe for more incredible stories and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the hospital lobby. Around me, colleagues and reporters turned to stare, but all I could see was the headline blazing across the giant screen. Local. Surgeon wins international award for revolutionary heart procedure. My picture filled the screen. Dr. CLARA HART. That was me. But as I stood there, surrounded by congratulations and camera flashes, all I could think about was the text message burning in my phone. Tommy's graduation dinner is Saturday at 7. Try not to be late for once. Janet. No mention of my award, no acknowledgement of the biggest achievement of my career. Just another reminder that to my family, I would always be Clara the burden. Clara who was lucky they put up with her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. From the moment everything changed when I was 16 and learned what it really meant to be unwanted. The day my mother died, I thought my world had ended. I was wrong. It was just beginning to fall apart. Mom had been sick for 2 years with cancer, and I'd spent every moment I could by her bedside. While other kids my age were at parties or football games, I was reading to her, helping her eat, holding her hand through chemo sessions. Dad worked double shifts to pay for her treatments, so it was mostly just me and Mom against the disease. The night she passed, I was holding her hand. Her last words to me were, "Clara, sweetheart, you're going to do amazing things. Don't let anyone make you small." If only she could see me now. 3 days after the funeral, Dad sat me down at our kitchen table. The same table where Mom used to help me with homework, where we'd eat breakfast together on Sunday mornings, where she'd taught me to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. "Clara, honey," Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. I can't do this alone. Raising a teenager, working, keeping up with everything. Janet and Mike have offered to take you in." Janet. My older sister, who was 8 years my senior, already married with 2 kids of her own. Janet, who had always looked at me like I was an inconvenience, even when Mom was alive. "Dad, I can take care of myself," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm 16. I can cook, clean, do laundry. I won't be any trouble." He shook his head, avoiding my eyes. "It's already decided. Janet's expecting you next week." That's how I ended up in the basement of my sister's suburban house, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of dampness that never quite went away. My room was really just a corner of the basement that Mike had sectioned off with some drywall. No windows, one small lamp, and a twin bed that creaked every time I moved. The first night, I could hear them talking upstairs. "I can't believe Dad just dumped her on us," Janet was saying to Mike. "We've got our own kids to think about. Sarah's only 8, and Josh is 5. Now we've got a moody teenager to deal with, too." "It's just until she graduates," Mike replied. 2 years? We can handle 2 years? 2 years of extra groceries, extra utilities, extra everything. And you know she's going to be weird about Mom dying. Probably all depressed and needy. I pulled my pillow over my head and cried myself to sleep. Mom had been gone for less than a week, and I was already being treated like a burden. The next morning, Janet laid out the rules over breakfast. I wasn't allowed to have friends over. I had to do my own laundry and help with household chores. I was expected to babysit Sarah and Josh when needed without pay, and I was to stay out of their way as much as possible. "We're doing you a huge favor," she said, not looking up from packing lunches for her kids. "The least you can do is be grateful and not cause any problems." I nodded silently, eating my cereal as quickly as possible. Sarah and Josh stared at me like I was some kind of zoo animal. They barely knew me. Janet had never encouraged a relationship between us when Mom was alive. School became my refuge. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that worried my teachers. While other kids were socializing and dating, I was in the library or at home in my basement room, studying by the light of that single lamp. I had nothing else to do. Janet made it clear that I wasn't really part of their family activities. When they went to movies, I stayed home to watch the house. When they went to dinner at restaurants, I was given a frozen pizza and told to eat in the basement so I wouldn't disturb their family time when they got back. When they took vacations, I stayed with Dad, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable around me, like I was a reminder of everything he'd lost. The worst part wasn't the isolation. It was the constant commentary. "Clara, you left your backpack by the front door. This isn't your house to mess up," Janet would say when her friends came over. "We had to get a bigger grocery budget because of Clara," she'd tell neighbors, right in front of me. "I don't know what we're going to do with her after graduation. She's got no life skills, no work experience. She's been dependent on others for everything." Each comment was like a small cut, but they added up. After 6 months, I started to believe them. Maybe I was a burden. Maybe I was lucky they tolerated me. Maybe I really was as helpless and useless as they made me feel. But then something changed. It was a Tuesday night in November, about 8 months after Mom died. I was in my basement room, struggling with calculus homework, when I heard sirens outside, then shouting, then Janet screaming. I ran upstairs to find chaos. Josh, who was now 6, had fallen down the stairs and wasn't moving. His arm was bent at a horrible angle and there was blood on his forehead. Janet was hysterical. Mike was on the phone with 911 and Sarah was crying in the corner. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees next to Josh. Mom had taught me basic first aid during her illness, how to check vitals, how to handle emergencies. My hands moved automatically, checking his pulse, his breathing, keeping his neck still in case of spinal injury. "Don't move him," I told Mike firmly. "Keep his head steady. Janet, get me a clean towel for his forehead. Sarah, go unlock the front door for the paramedics." For the first time in months, I felt useful. I felt needed. I stayed with Josh, keeping him calm and conscious until the EMTs arrived. At the hospital, while Janet and Mike were talking to doctors, I sat with Sarah in the waiting room, helping her with her math homework to keep her distracted. Josh ended up being fine. A broken arm and a mild concussion. But something had shifted in the house dynamic. For about a week, Janet was actually nice to me. She thanked me for helping during the emergency. She included me in conversations at dinner. She even asked about my day at school. I thought maybe things were changing. I thought maybe she was starting to see me as family instead of an obligation. Was wrong. 2 weeks later, I overheard her on the phone with her friend Lisa. "Oh, Clara. Yeah, she was helpful during Josh's accident, I'll give her that. But don't let that fool you. She's still the same moody teenager who eats our food and takes up space. At least she made herself useful for once." That night, I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I decided that if I was going to be seen as a burden no matter what I did, I might as well become someone who couldn't be dismissed. I was going to become someone important, someone valuable, someone they couldn't ignore. I started researching colleges and careers obsessively. I raised my GPA from a 3.2 to a 3.9 in one semester. I took extra AP classes. I volunteered at the local hospital, partly because I needed extracurriculars for college applications, but mostly because it was the only place I felt like I mattered. At the hospital, I wasn't Clara the burden. I was Clara the volunteer who stayed late to read to elderly patients. Clara who could calm scared children before procedures. Clara who asked thoughtful questions during educational rounds. The doctors and nurses treated me with respect and kindness, things I'd almost forgotten existed. Dr. Martinez, the head of cardiology, took a special interest in me. She was a woman who'd worked her way up in a male-dominated field, and she saw something in me that my own family didn't. "Clara," she said one day as I was organizing patient files, "have you thought about medical school?" I laughed bitterly. "Dr. Martinez, I can barely afford college. Medical school is for people with money and family support." "Medical school is for people with brains and determination," she corrected. "And you have both. There are scholarships, work-study programs, ways to make it happen if you want it badly enough." She gave me information about pre-med programs, scholarship opportunities, everything I needed to start planning a different future. For the first time since Mom died, I felt hope. At home, I threw myself into preparation with single-minded focus. While Janet's kids played video games upstairs, I studied organic chemistry and anatomy. While they watched TV as a family, I memorized Latin medical terms. While they went on weekend trips to visit Mike's parents, I worked extra shifts at the hospital and studied for the SATs. My senior year, everything started falling into place. I scored 1540 on the SATs. I was accepted to State University with a full academic scholarship that would cover tuition, room, and board. I was finally going to escape the basement, escape the constant reminders that I didn't belong. The day my acceptance letter arrived, I was so excited I ran upstairs to share the news with Janet and Mike. They were in the kitchen discussing weekend plans with the kids. "Janet, Mike, I got in," I said, waving the letter. "Full scholarship to State University, pre-med program." Janet looked up from her coffee with mild interest. "Oh, that's nice, Clara. Pre-med, huh? That's going to be expensive." "No, that's the point. It's a full scholarship. Everything's covered. I won't cost you anything. And after graduation, I'll be completely independent." "Well," Mike said, returning to his newspaper, "let's hope you can handle it. College is a lot harder than high school." That was it. No congratulations, no celebration, no pride in what I'd accomplished, just doubt and the assumption that I'd probably fail. But their reaction taught me something important. I couldn't count on them for support or validation. I had to find it within myself. College was a revelation. For the first time in years, I was around people who valued intelligence and hard work. My professors appreciated my dedication. My classmates respected my insights. I made friends, real friends who invited me to study groups and social events. I worked multiple part-time jobs to pay for textbooks and expenses the scholarship didn't cover. I tutored other students in chemistry and biology. I volunteered at the University Medical Center. I maintained a 3.95 GPA while working 20 hours a week. During breaks, I'd go back to Janet's house, and it was like stepping back in time. I'd become invisible again, the burden who took up space in the basement. They'd ask perfunctory questions about school, but never really listen to the answers. They had their own lives, their own concerns, their own family dynamic that didn't include me. The summer before my senior year, I got an internship at a research hospital 3 hours away. It was unpaid, but it was incredible experience in cardiac surgery research. I called Janet to let her know I wouldn't be coming home. "That's fine," she said. "Actually, it's probably better. Mike's been wanting to convert the basement into a man cave anyway." My childhood bedroom was being turned into a place to watch football. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Senior year, I applied to medical schools across the country. My professors wrote glowing recommendations. My MCAT scores were in the 95th percentile. My research on cardiac cell regeneration had been published in an undergraduate journal. I was accepted to 7 medical schools, including some of the most prestigious programs in the country. I chose the state medical school because it offered the best financial aid package and had an excellent cardiac surgery program. The day I got my acceptance letter, I called Janet to share the news. "Medical school?" she said, sounding surprised. "Clara, are you sure you can handle that? It's incredibly competitive and expensive. What if you fail out? What if you can't find a job afterward? Doctors are a dime a dozen these days. Not congratulations. Not pride. Just doubt and worry about what would happen if I failed." "I've thought it through, Janet. I've got scholarships and financial aid, and I've been working toward this for 4 years." "Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Just don't come crying to us if it doesn't work out. We can't support you financially if this doesn't pan out." I hung up the phone and realized something profound. They weren't just unsupportive. They were actively hoping I'd fail. My success made them uncomfortable because it challenged their narrative about who I was supposed to be. Medical school was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most rewarding. I was surrounded by brilliant, driven people who understood my passion for healing. I found my calling in cardiac surgery, the precision, the life or death stakes, the ability to literally repair broken hearts. During my 4 years of medical school, I went home for exactly 3 holidays, 2 Christmases, and Josh's high school graduation. Each time, the same pattern repeated. I'd arrive hopeful that maybe this time would be different, that maybe they'd want to know about my life, my studies, my future plans. Instead, I got the same polite disinterest. They'd ask how school was going. I'd start to explain about my cardiac, surgery rotation, or my research project, and their eyes would glaze over. The conversation would quickly shift to Sarah's new boyfriend or Josh's basketball season or Mike's promotion at work. At Josh's graduation party, I overheard Janet talking to her neighbor. "Oh, Clara, she's still in school. Medical school now. If you can believe it. I don't know how she's paying for it all. Probably drowning in debt. I keep telling her she should have just gotten a regular job after college, but she's always been stubborn." Stubborn. That's how she described my determination to become a doctor. The breaking point came during my residency. I was working 80-hour weeks at one of the most demanding cardiac surgery programs in the country. I'd been awake for 36 hours. Straight when I got a call from Janet. "Clara, I need a favor. Sarah's getting married next month and we need help with the catering costs. Can you loan us $5,000? I was so tired I could barely think straight. "Janet, I'm a resident. I make $30,000 a year and I'm paying off student loans. I don't have $5,000. "Come on, Clara. You're a doctor now? You must have some money saved up. I'm a resident. I won't be making real money for years. And I've got over $200,000 in student debt." There was a pause. Then, "Well, I guess we know where your priorities are. Family obviously isn't important to you anymore." She hung up. I stood in the hospital hallway still in my scrubs and cried for the first time in years. Not because I couldn't help with the wedding costs, but because after everything I'd achieved, I was still the disappointing sister who wasn't doing enough. I wasn't invited to Sarah's wedding. The years blurred together after that. Residency, fellowship, my first job as an attending cardiac surgeon. I sent Christmas cards and birthday gifts, but I stopped calling. I stopped visiting. It was easier to accept that we just weren't close than to keep hoping for something that would never happen. My career took off in ways I'd never imagined. I developed new surgical techniques, published research papers, gave lectures at medical conferences around the world. I was featured in medical journals, interviewed for documentaries, invited to teach at prestigious hospitals, but I never shared any of it with my family. They'd made it clear they weren't interested in my life, so I stopped trying to include them. Then Tommy graduated from college and started his master's program in biomedical engineering. Janet would occasionally mention his achievements in our rare phone conversations, how proud she was, how smart he was, how he was going to change the world. I was happy for Tommy, but there was always an unspoken comparison. He was the family success story. I was still just Clara, the sister who'd disappeared into medicine and never looked back. When Janet called about Tommy's graduation dinner, I almost said no. I had surgery scheduled the next morning, a complex procedure that would take most of the day. But Tommy was my nephew, and despite everything, I wanted to support him. So I said yes, knowing I'd probably spend another evening being politely ignored while everyone celebrated Tommy's achievements. I had no idea that one question from a stranger would change everything. The restaurant was exactly what I expected. One of those upscale places where Janet could show off to Tommy's friends and professors. The kind of place that screamed, "Look how successful we are," to anyone who might be watching. I arrived early, as usual. It was a habit I'd developed over the years. Better to be sitting alone for 15 minutes than to walk into a room full of people who'd rather I wasn't there. The hostess led me to our reserved table, a long arrangement that could seat 12 people. I chose a seat near the end, pulling out my phone to check emails from the hospital. Tomorrow's surgery was complex, and I wanted to review the patient's scans one more time. As I scrolled through medical images on my phone, I became aware of voices approaching. Janet's laugh, loud and performative, Mike's deeper voice explaining something about parking, the excited chatter of young people celebrating a milestone. They descended on the table like a small hurricane of celebration and congratulations. Tommy looked handsome in his navy suit, beaming with the confidence of someone who'd just completed a significant achievement. His girlfriend Emma was radiant in a red dress. Sarah and Josh had come with their respective partners. Mike's parents were there, along with a few of Tommy's classmates and friends. Janet air-kissed my cheek when she saw me, a gesture we both knew was for show. "Oh, good, Clara, you made it. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get away from the hospital." "I wouldn't miss Tommy's graduation," I said, standing to hug my nephew. Tommy's hug was genuine but brief, the kind you give to a relative you're fond of but don't really know. And that's exactly what we were to each other, fond strangers connected by genetics and nothing else. As everyone settled into their seats, I found myself exactly where I'd expected, at the far end of the table, between Emma and one of Tommy's study partners, the perfect spot to observe the celebration without being part of it. The conversation flowed around me in familiar patterns. Janet was in full proud mother mode, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories of Tommy's academic achievements. Mike talked about the job market for biomedical engineers. Sarah and Josh shared updates about their own careers and relationships. Listened politely, occasionally nodding or smiling at appropriate moments. When the server came around for drink orders, I asked for a glass of wine. I had a feeling I was going to need it. "So, Tommy," said Dr. Peterson, one of his professors who'd joined us for dinner, "tell everyone about your thesis project. I think they'd find it fascinating." Tommy's face lit up. "I've been working on innovations in cardiac surgery technology, specifically developing more precise robotic systems for minimally invasive procedures. The goal is to reduce patient recovery time and improve surgical outcomes." My attention sharpened. This was my field, my specialty. I'd been working on similar innovations for years. "That sounds incredibly complex," Janet said, beaming with pride. "I don't understand a word of it, but I know it's important." "It is," Dr. Peterson agreed. "Tommy's work builds on some groundbreaking research that's been published in recent years. There's this cardiac surgeon who's revolutionized minimally invasive techniques, Dr. CLARA HART. Have you heard of her?" The name hung in the air. My name. Spoken with the kind of reverence usually reserved for medical legends. I felt my heart skip a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. Around the table, everyone shook their heads. No, they hadn't heard of Dr. CLARA HART. "She's incredible," Tommy said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Dr. Hart has developed techniques that have changed everything about cardiac surgery. Her procedures reduce recovery time from months to weeks. She's saved thousands of lives." Janet smiled indulgently. "Well, I'm sure she's very accomplished. It's wonderful that you have such inspiring role models in your field." "More than accomplished," Dr. Peterson continued. "She's a legend. I assign her research papers in all my advanced classes. The HART technique, that's what they call her surgical method, is being used in hospitals worldwide. The HART technique. Named after me, my technique, my innovation, my contribution to medical science that was helping save lives around the globe, and my family had never heard of it." "She sounds amazing," Emma said. "I'd love to read about her work." "You should," Tommy agreed. "She's not just brilliant, she's also incredibly humanitarian. Dr. Hart runs free cardiac surgery programs in underserved communities. She operates on patients who can't afford treatment, completely pro bono." I took a sip of wine, trying to process the surreal experience of listening to my nephew praise my work, while my sister sat 5 feet away, completely unaware that he was talking about me. The conversation moved on to other topics. Tommy's job prospects, the state of healthcare, the challenges facing young professionals. I participated minimally, adding an occasional comment or question, but mostly I observed. This was my family. These people who shared my DNA, who'd shaped my childhood, who'd taught me that I was a burden to be tolerated rather than a person to be valued. And they had no idea that the woman they were praising, Dr. CLARA HART, the revolutionary cardiac surgeon, was sitting right at their table. As dinner progressed, I found myself studying each face around the table. Janet, still beautiful at 52, animated as she told stories about Tommy's childhood. Mike, graying, but distinguished, playing the role of proud uncle. Sarah and Josh, now adults with their own lives and relationships, barely acknowledging my presence. They were good people, I realized. Flawed, certainly, but not malicious. They loved Tommy genuinely. They supported each other through difficulties. They celebrated each other's successes. They just didn't know how to love me. Or maybe they'd never learned who I really was. The irony was devastating. Here I was, listening to my nephew talk about my work with genuine admiration and respect, while my own family saw me as someone who'd never amounted to much. They were proud of Tommy for studying innovations I'd created. They were inspired by humanitarian work I'd been doing for years. They respected a surgeon whose name they didn't realize they knew. Dessert arrived, a beautiful chocolate cake with "Congratulations, Tommy," written in gold frosting. As we ate, Dr. Peterson shared more stories about outstanding professionals in biomedical engineering. Several times he mentioned research I'd published or techniques I'd developed, always with the same reverence, always completely unaware that the author of that work was sitting 20 feet away. Tommy hung on every word. This young man I barely knew was genuinely passionate about the field I'd devoted my life to. Under different circumstances, I could have been his mentor, his guide into the world of cardiac surgery. Instead, I was a stranger at the end of the table, invisible and irrelevant to his journey. Janet was telling a story about Tommy's high school science fair project when I noticed someone approaching our table. A distinguished older man in a well-tailored suit, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to being recognized and respected. It was Professor Williams. I knew him by reputation, a giant in the field of biomedical engineering, author of textbooks I'd studied in medical school, winner of numerous prestigious awards. He'd been featured on magazine covers and interviewed in documentaries about medical innovation, but he wasn't walking toward Tommy or Dr. Peterson. His eyes were fixed on me with a look of recognition and something that might have been surprise. Conversation at our table began to quiet as people noticed the approaching figure. Janet straightened in her chair, probably assuming he was coming to congratulate Tommy. Mike adjusted his tie. Sarah and Josh looked curious about who this obviously important person might be. Professor Williams stopped directly beside my chair. The entire table fell silent, all eyes moving between him and me. I could feel their confusion, their curiosity, about why this distinguished stranger was focusing on the quiet woman at the end of the table. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. "Excuse me," Professor Williams said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding lecture halls filled with brilliant minds. "Are you Dr. CLARA HART?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I could see Janet's face go white, Mike's eyes widen in confusion, Tommy's mouth fall open in shock. Emma looked between me and Professor Williams like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Sarah and Josh were staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. The silence stretched on, heavy with 20 years of assumptions, 20 years of being invisible, 20 years of being seen as less than I was. I looked around the table, at these people who'd shaped my life through their indifference. Janet, who'd called me a burden so often I'd started to believe it. Mike, who'd never asked about my work or my dreams. Sarah and Josh, who knew me only as their father's weird sister who lived in basements and worked at hospitals. And Tommy, this brilliant young man who'd been studying my work without knowing it, who'd been inspired by my achievements without realizing they belonged to the aunt he barely knew. In that moment, I understood that my answer to Professor Williams's question would change everything. Not just for me, but for all of them. There would be no going back to the comfortable fiction that I was just CLARA, the sister who'd never amounted to much. I looked directly at Professor Williams, drew a deep breath, and spoke the words that would shatter 20 years of carefully constructed invisibility. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "I am Dr. CLARA HART." Professor Williams' face broke into the kind of smile I'd only seen in medical conferences, the expression of someone meeting a hero they'd only read about in journals. The warmth in his eyes was so genuine, so different from the polite tolerance I was used to from family gatherings that I almost started crying right there at the table. "Dr. Hart," he said, his voice filled with genuine reverence. "I cannot believe I'm meeting you here. I've been following your work for over a decade. Your research on minimally invasive cardiac procedures has fundamentally changed how we approach heart surgery." The silence at our table was deafening. I could hear the soft jazz playing in the background, the clink of silverware from neighboring tables, the gentle hum of conversations around us. But at our table, 12 people sat in stunned silence, watching this interaction unfold like they were witnessing something impossible. Janet's fork was frozen halfway to her mouth, a piece of chocolate cake balanced precariously on the end. Mike had gone completely pale, his eyes darting between Professor Williams and me like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. Tommy was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Awe mixed with confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. "Professor Williams," I managed, finding my voice. "It's an honor to meet you. I've read your work on biomedical engineering applications in cardiac surgery. Your textbook was required reading during my residency." He laughed, a rich sound that carried genuine delight. "My textbook? Dr. Hart, your papers are required reading in programs across the country now. The HART technique has become the gold standard for mitral valve repair. Do you realize that your method has reduced surgical mortality rates by 40%? 40%. Thousands of lives saved because of work I'd done in operating rooms, while my family assumed I was just getting by as some kind of generic doctor, Email. Grateful the technique has been helpful," I said quietly, acutely aware of every eye at the table boring into me. "Helpful?" Professor Williams shook his head incredulously. "Dr. Hart, you're being far too modest. Your work hasn't just been helpful. It's been revolutionary. The documentary they aired about your pro bono surgery program was absolutely inspiring. 300 free cardiac surgeries in underserved communities over 5 years? That's not just medical excellence, that's humanitarian heroism." I could hear Janet's sharp intake of breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah lean forward, her eyes wide with something between shock and disbelief. "You mentioned Tommy here," Professor Williams continued, gesturing toward my nephew who was still staring at me with his mouth slightly open. "I hope he appreciates how lucky he is to have someone like you in his family. I assign your research papers in my advanced biomedical engineering courses. Your work on robotic-assisted cardiac procedures is literally shaping the next generation of medical technology." Tommy found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Aunt Clara? You're the Dr. Clara Hart? The one Professor Williams talks about in class? The one who created the HART technique?" The HART technique. My technique. The surgical method I'd developed after watching too many patients struggle through traditional open heart recovery. The procedure that had started as an idea scribbled on a napkin during a particularly difficult case and had somehow become a standard practice in cardiac surgery programs worldwide. "Yes," I said simply, because there was nothing else to say. "But..." Tommy's voice trailed off. He looked around the table, then back at me. "But you never said... We never knew." Professor Williams looked confused by the obvious tension at our table. "Oh, are you family? How wonderful. You must be incredibly proud. Dr. Hart was just featured on the cover of Cardiac Surgery Today, the youngest surgeon ever to receive that honor. And the interview she did with Medical Innovations Weekly about her research on pediatric cardiac surgery was absolutely fascinating." The words hit the table like physical blows. I watched as the information sank in, watched as 20 years of assumptions crumbled in real time. Janet had gone from pale to flushed, her eyes filling with tears that I couldn't quite identify. Were they tears of pride? Shame? Confusion? Mike was gripping his wine glass so tightly I was worried it might shatter. Sarah and Josh were exchanging glances that spoke volumes about conversations they'd never bothered to have with me. "I don't understand," Janet said finally, her voice small and strained. "Clara, you never told us. You never said you were..." "Famous?" Mike finished weakly. Professor Williams' confusion deepened. "I'm sorry. I seem to have stepped into something. I just assumed. Dr. Hart, your family must know about your achievements." The question in his voice hung in the air. Of course my family would know about my achievements, right? What kind of family wouldn't know that their daughter, their sister, their aunt was one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country? "It's complicated," I said softly, not wanting to embarrass Professor Williams or create more drama at Tommy's celebration dinner. But Professor Williams was warming to his subject, clearly excited to talk about work he genuinely admired. Dr. Hart, I have to ask, are you considering the department head position at Johns Hopkins? The rumors in academic circles have been fascinating to follow. Johns Hopkins. The offer I'd been avoiding for months. The opportunity of a lifetime that would make me one of the youngest department heads in the history of cardiac surgery. The position that came with a salary that would put me in the top 1% of physicians nationwide, along with my own research laboratory and a team of the brightest surgical residents in the country. I'm still considering my options, I said carefully. Well, I certainly hope you take it, Professor Williams said enthusiastically. Johns Hopkins would be incredibly lucky to have you. Although I have to say, I'm surprised you'd consider leaving. You've built such an incredible program here. The cardiac surgery center where you work has become one of the most respected in the nation, largely because of your innovations. He turned to address the table. Did you know that Dr. Hart's surgical success rate is the highest in the region? 98% success rate on procedures that other surgeons consider too risky to attempt. She's literally saving patients that other doctors have given up on. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, these people who had known me for decades, who had watched me grow up, who had shaped my understanding of my place in the world. They were learning about my life from a stranger. The cardiac center where I work, I said quietly. It's about 20 minutes from here. I've been there for 8 years. 20 minutes away. For 8 years, I'd been working 20 minutes from where my family lived, saving lives, developing revolutionary techniques, building a reputation that spanned continents, and they'd never known because they'd never asked. Tommy was shaking, his head slowly like he was trying to wake up from a confusing dream. Aunt Clara, I wrote my entire thesis on innovations in cardiac surgery. I've read everything about the HART technique. I've studied your research papers for 2 years. How did I not know? His voice trailed off, but I could finish the sentence. For him. How did he not know that the author of the work he'd been studying was his own aunt? How had his family never mentioned that their sister, their aunt, was exactly the kind of surgeon he dreamed of becoming? The answer was simple and devastating. Because they'd never bothered to learn what I did for a living. Professor Williams was still talking, his enthusiasm undimmed by the obvious tension he'd stumbled into. Dr. Hart, I've been meaning to reach out to you about a collaboration. I'm working on developing new robotic surgical systems, and your expertise in minimally invasive techniques would be invaluable. Would you be interested in discussing a research partnership? A research partnership with Professor Williams, the kind of opportunity that most surgeons could only dream of. The kind of collaboration that could advance cardiac surgery by decades. I'd be very interested in discussing that, I said, my voice steadier now. Excellent. Here's my card. My research team and I would be thrilled to work with someone of your caliber. He handed me his business card, then turned back to the table. You're all very lucky to have Dr. Hart in your family. She's not just a brilliant surgeon. She's genuinely one of the most compassionate physicians I've ever encountered. The stories I've heard from her patients, the lives she's saved, the families she's helped through impossible situations. Paused, seeming to realize that his words weren't landing the way he'd expected. The faces around the table weren't showing pride or happiness. They were showing shock, confusion, and something that looked uncomfortably like shame. Well, he said, clearly sensing the tension, I should let you get back to your celebration. Tommy, congratulations again on your graduation. Dr. Hart, it's been an absolute honor. I hope we can work together soon. After he left, the silence stretched on. Our server appeared to refill water glasses, clearly sensing the tension but professionally, ignoring it. At neighboring tables, families continued their normal celebrations, laughing, toasting, sharing stories. Normal families who actually knew each other. Finally, Janet broke the silence. Clara, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell us? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Why didn't I tell them? When would I have told them? During the Christmas dinners where they talked about everyone else's achievements but never asked about mine? During the birthday parties where I sat silently while they discussed their own lives? During the phone calls that lasted exactly long? Enough for them to ask for favors but never long enough to learn about my work? Tell you what, Janet, I asked, my voice calm despite the storm of emotions in my chest. That I went to medical school? You knew that? That I became a surgeon? You knew that too. You just never asked what kind of surgeon or where I worked or what I specialized in. But you're famous, Josh said, speaking for the first time since Professor Williams had left. His voice was filled with awe and bewilderment. You're actually famous in medicine, and you never said anything. When would I have said something? I asked, looking around the table at these people who were my family but felt like strangers. At Sarah's birthday party 3 years ago when you all spent 2 hours talking about her promotion at the bank but never asked about my work? At Tommy's high school graduation when Janet introduced me to people as just my sister? At Dad's funeral when Mike told people I was still in school because he didn't know I'd already completed my residency and fellowship? Janet flinched like I'd slapped her. That's not... I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You all did. For 20 years, I've been Clara the burden. Clara who lived in your basement. Clara who was lucky to have family who put up with her. Clara who never quite got her act together like everyone else. I looked at Tommy, this young man I barely knew despite being his aunt. Tommy, you spent the last hour talking about Dr. Clara Hart with genuine admiration and respect. You've been studying my work for 2 years. You want to go into cardiac surgery because of innovations I developed. But you had no idea that the surgeon you've been idolizing was sitting right at this table because no one in this family has ever bothered to learn what I actually do with my life. Tommy's face was pale. Aunt Clara, if I'd known... You couldn't have known, I said, my voice gentler now. No one told you. Janet, when Tommy was struggling with his thesis research on cardiac surgery innovations, did you ever think to mention that your sister was a cardiac surgeon? When he was trying to understand robotic surgical techniques, did it occur to you that I might be able to help? The silence that followed was answer enough. I thought... Janet's voice cracked. I always thought you were just... you were so quiet. You seemed like you were barely getting by. You lived in our basement, you worked at the hospital, but I thought you were just... I don't know, a lab technician or something. For 8 years? I asked. You thought I was a lab technician for 8 years? Janet, I've been an attending cardiac surgeon for 8 years. Before that, I did 5 years of residency and 2 years of fellowship. I've been a doctor for 15 years, and you thought I was a lab technician. Mike cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Clara, we didn't know because you never talked about your work. You were always so secretive about everything. Secretive? The word came out sharper than I intended. Mike, in the 15 years I've been a doctor, have you ever even once asked me about my day, about my work, about my patients, about what I do when I leave family gatherings and go back to my life? The answer was written on his face. No. He'd never asked because he'd never been interested enough to ask. You want to know why I stopped talking about my work? I continued. Because every time I tried, you changed the subject. Every time I started to explain what I was doing, you found something more interesting to discuss. So I learned to just say work is fine and move on to topics you actually cared about. Sarah spoke up for the first time, her voice small. Clara, we didn't realize... we knew you were smart, but we didn't know you were... successful, I finished. Accomplished, making a difference in the world. She nodded, looking like she might cry. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. This wasn't how I'd wanted this conversation to go. I'd never wanted to hurt them or make them feel small. But 20 years of being made to feel invisible had finally caught up with me. The Johns Hopkins offer, I said quietly. It's for department head of cardiac surgery. It would make me one of the youngest department heads in the history of the program. The salary would put me in the top 1% of physicians in the country. I'd have my own research laboratory, my own team of residents, funding for clinical trials that could change cardiac surgery forever. I paused, looking around the table at their stunned faces. I turned it down, I continued. 3 times, because I thought maybe someday my family would want to actually know me. I thought maybe if I stayed close, we could build real relationships. I thought maybe eventually you'd see me as more than just the sister who was lucky you tolerated her. Janet was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Clara, we can fix this. We can start over. We can—" "Fix what, Janet?" I asked, my voice sad rather than angry. "Fix 20 years of making me feel like I didn't matter? Fix 2 decades of treating my achievements like they were embarrassing secrets? Fix the fact that my own nephew has been studying my work for years without anyone bothering to mention that his aunt was the author?" I stood up slowly, placing my napkin on the table. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm, other families celebrating, laughing, sharing genuine moments of connection and pride. "The HART technique," I said, looking directly at Tommy. "It's named after me. The surgical method you've been studying, the innovation you're trying to build on. I developed it 6 years ago after watching too many patients struggle through traditional open heart recovery. It started as an idea I had during a particularly difficult case, and somehow it became standard practice in cardiac surgery programs worldwide." Tommy was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which in many ways he was. "The pro bono surgery program Professor Williams mentioned? I spend every other weekend operating on patients who can't afford cardiac surgery. Heart disease doesn't discriminate based on income, but access to treatment does. So I donate my time to make sure people don't die just because they're poor." I looked at Janet, who was still crying silently. "The documentary he talked about? It aired last month on the Discovery Health Channel. It followed me through a weekend of free surgeries in rural communities. The families I operated on, the lives we saved. It was some of the most meaningful work I've ever done." "Why didn't you tell us about the documentary?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you never ask about my life," I said simply. "Because in 20 years, not one of you has ever shown genuine interest in what I do or who I am beyond family gatherings." The truth hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been avoiding for weeks. Dr. Sarah Chen, the department head at Johns Hopkins who'd been trying to recruit me for over a year. "Dr. Chen?" I said when she answered, my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside me. "It's CLARA HART. I know it's late, but I wanted to call you about the position we discussed. Is the offer still available?" I could hear the excitement in her voice even through the phone. "Dr. Hart, of course it's still available. We've been hoping you'd reconsider. When can you start?" "I'll need to give my current hospital 3 months' notice to transition my patients and complete my current research projects. Would January work?" "January would be perfect. Dr. Hart, I can't tell you how thrilled we are. You're going to revolutionize our program." I hung up and looked around the table one more time. 12 people who were my family by blood but strangers by choice. People who'd shaped my understanding of my worth through their indifference, who'd taught me to make myself small so they'd be more comfortable. "Congratulations, Tommy," I said, my voice warm despite everything. "You should be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. Your research is impressive, and you're going to do amazing things in biomedical engineering." I paused, then added, "If you're ever interested in learning more about cardiac surgery, you know how to find me. I'd be happy to help you understand the field better." Tommy nodded, though he looked like he was still processing everything that had happened. "Clara, please don't go," Janet said, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. We can be better. We can—" "You can't fix 20 years in one evening, Janet," I said gently. "And honestly, I'm not sure you want to. You're comfortable with your version of who I am. The successful version, the accomplished version, the version that saved lives and changed medicine. That version makes you uncomfortable because it challenges everything you've believed about me." I picked up my purse and coat. "I'm going to Baltimore to take the position at Johns Hopkins. I'm going to head up their cardiac surgery program and train the next generation of surgeons. I'm going to continue developing techniques that save lives and conducting research that advances medicine." I looked at each of them one final time. "And for the first time in 20 years, I'm going to do it surrounded by people who actually know who I am and value what I contribute to the world." As I walked toward the restaurant exit, I could hear Janet calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I'd spent 2 decades turning around, hoping this time would be different. hoping this time they'd see me. Outside in the parking lot, I sat, in my car for a few minutes, letting the magnitude of what had just happened wash over me. My phone buzzed with text messages, probably from family members who finally had questions about my life now that they knew it was worth asking about. But I didn't read them. Instead, I drove to the hospital where I'd worked for 8 years, where my colleagues knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I had rounds to finish and a surgery to prepare for tomorrow morning. Real work. Meaningful work. Work that mattered. For the first time in my life, I was done making myself small for people who were too comfortable to see how big I'd always been. What did you think of CLARA's powerful moment of truth? Do you think her family will learn from this experience? Or is it too late? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more incredible stories like this, and share with someone who needs to know their worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. The end. Based on a true story that reminds us that sometimes the people closest to us see us the least clearly. Your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it, it's determined by the impact you make in the world.